Okay, so today we're going to look at a couple of terms for the glossary. And I don't know if you all saw it, but this week I released the glossary as a one big PDF file. It's like 280 pages. So all of our word studies we've been doing the last about year and a half collected in one place. There's more to add yet because there's some pages have not been edited, but we'll get to that. I'm hoping within the next 3 months to get the majority of what remains done. Problem is I keep coming out with new terms. You know, when you understand God's character and you read scriptures, you will read something and think, whoa, I've always understood that term this way, and that doesn't correspond with the truth of God's character, so better add that to the list. So today we're going to look at a couple of terms, commands or commandments, and free will, and they kind of go together, I think, quite nicely. So we're going to look at those terms. We want to know the meaning of each one, of course, and the relationship between them is quite important. So the first question is, when God gives us commandments or commands, or tells or asks us to do something, is that negating free will, or is it honoring and respecting it? Just a question to get us started here. Any thoughts there?
I have a thought.
Okay.
Nothing negates free will.
Yeah, I was going to say you've got the free will to obey that command or not.
Okay.
So your free will is still
Okay.
still there.
If we have the free will, then what must not exist along with it?
What must not exist?
Yes.
Force.
Okay, Dorothy said force. Very good. Force or coercion of any sort, if that is there to back up the command, then really we don't have free will. So if there is free will, there must not be force or coercion or intimidation or mandates or any number of words I got. Okay. It also depends on the actual meaning of the words, like the word command. It does have a variety of meanings, and that's what we'll be looking at. So the meaning of the word and the context in which it is used. So if the commands or commandments are commands as commonly understood, doesn't that open the way, at least in our minds, for force or some kind of coercive pressure to get compliance? Axel, comment?
Thank you, Ray. I'm just thinking that with God's commands, are there always conditions that apply?
Condition.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking if to obey or not to obey is within our free choice, but then either way we go, there are still consequences and results, right? So
yes.
On that basis, I'm saying that there are conditions. There are always conditions.
Yes. I would prefer the word consequences. I think that's what you're referring to. It's different from a condition. But whether we obey or not, there will be consequences either way. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, when you think of the word command or commandment, I think of command, I think of the army, and you got to obey or else you're in trouble.
Okay.
In the army.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise you're, I forget what the word is. You're no, yeah. Anyway, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You get court-martialed or whatever
okay.
whatever happens if
yeah.
that way.
Yeah, so that's looking at command in the context of an army situation. And there it is very strict obedience. It's performance oriented, and definitely there would be consequences. Paul?
It's funny with these commandments, because half the people would look at them and read them and say, oh, this is all good for me. So God must really love me because he wants the best for me. But other people will read them and say, oh, he's telling me what to do. You always have people that are rebellious and they don't want to be told what to do. So they have that in their mind already before they even read, something like this. So I can see it affecting people in both ways.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's probably quite a clear separation between the two attitudes. And here's a question, I guess, to go along with that. What is it that would most cause a person to take one side or the other? God is restricting me, or God is protecting me, and maybe as a way of saying the two sides. What will influence a person most to go one way or the other? Gary?
I think it's their understanding of God's character.
Okay. I think you're right on. Is God on my side? Is he looking out for my best interests or not? Or is he just a killjoy? Which side you take on the question of God's character and relationship to me will most affect my view of the commandments. I guess what Paul was saying.
They also could be affected by the way they were raised as children. If they were raised by somebody who gave commands all the time and was, very forceful parents, then that would influence them, I would think, too.
Okay. And why does that have that effect? What's the connection?
What's the connection?
Isn't it because, say, if I was raised in a very authoritarian, commanding family, that would make me think that God is like that?
Yeah, because often your father is kind of that's how you get a picture of God, is how your father treated you.
Yeah, your God figure.
Sometimes, yeah. But other people can see past that and see, well, okay, God's not like that.
Yeah. Now, whether I had an advantage or not, I'm not sure, but my father died when I was 12 years old, so I didn't have that earthly father figure past that point. Okay, here's this question. If the commandments are given in the context of free will, does that give the option of compliance or not to the one being commanded?
Sure.
Okay, it does, doesn't it? Because free will implies the freedom to make a choice. Absolutely. So the nature of the commands then is dependent on the degree of freedom of those being commanded. Does that make sense?
Nature.
Yes.
Okay. So I made a kind of a chart here, hopefully to help. So here is the reaction of the commander if there's no compliance. In the context of no free will, the possible reactions of the one giving the commandments are anything from doing nothing to punishment, even punishment by death. Okay, the commander can do whatever he wants in regard to no compliance. Where there's complete free will, the reactions of the one giving the commandments are more limited. Okay, he can still choose to do nothing, but if it's free will, then there can't be punishment or coercion of any sort, or it's not free will. So all God can do is the one giving the commandments in the context of free will is anything from doing nothing to some degree of, I'm calling it accommodation. Okay, so accommodation can be allowing the person to go ahead with the choice they have made. That would be the usual situation. Okay, so let's look at these options a bit more. The free will option. What is the difference between doing nothing and providing an accommodation?
Sorry, Ray.
Yeah. Go ahead, Axel.
Would you mind clarifying the no free will and the diagram, the box that you, would you mind clarifying that again for me, please?
Let me go over it again. So we've got,
particularly the nothing, why the nothing and the arrow for under no free will. I'm
okay.
not getting the
so we've got
correlation.
someone giving a command. If there is no compliance, the command is not obeyed, then what are the possible reactions of the one giving the commandment? And I'm asking that question under two scenarios, if you want, two contexts. If the ones being commanded have no free will and they do not comply, they disobey, then what are the possible reactions of the one giving the commandment? They could be anything from doing nothing to, and the arrow just is showing a range, okay? Anything from doing nothing to imposing a penalty of death. All those options are open to the one giving the commandment. If the one giving the commandments is operating in the context of free will of his subjects, and those subjects do not comply, they disobey, he again has the option of doing nothing, or he can make some accommodation. He could say, okay, you disobeyed, so I'll make an accommodation. I'll allow you to go on and experience the consequences, would probably be the most common one. But he cannot impose punishment or death arbitrarily. He can allow consequences, but he cannot force or coerce the will. Hopefully that made it clear.
Because then it
Yeah, for
wouldn't
sure.
be
Thanks.
free will.
Because then it wouldn't be free will. Yeah. So if the context is free
okay.
will, then the one giving the commandments has to operate within that context because he's the one that's granted free will. Okay, Gary?
Yeah, that raises a question. One of the objections that's often raised by those who hold the picture of God that tends to look at him as forceful, as coercive, as violent, and restrictive is he say, you guys, you don't believe that this is the way God operates, that his government does not work like that. Then you believe then it's just okay to let the criminal elements, the murderers, the rapists, the robbers, just take over and wreak havoc in society. So you say that God does not use force and violence and restriction, whatever. And if you do that, then that means you've got to let these people that are like that go, because God cannot stop. He cannot force. He cannot, be violent toward these people. And so they often use that as a reason for rejecting the character of God as far as being nonviolent, restrictive, forceful, and whatever. And I have always come back and said, well, God did say in the day that you eat thereof, the fruit of sin, you're going to die. And I just tell them, I just believe that it is literally what God said. He is the source of life. Sin cuts us off. And the moment we sin, we choose it, we cut off and we die. So there's not a problem with them taking over.
Yeah.
All God has to do is just draw himself, and that's it.
Yeah.
There ain't going to be no rapists and no murderers, and so, what do you, how would you answer these people? Oh, it's okay to use force and violence. It's okay to use restriction and coercion in certain cases. And that is the argument of the penal legal. Well, of course it is okay to use violence at times and to be restrictive and to control people and that's their argument. Why? Because God must, because if he doesn't, then society is going to go into chaos. The government would be corrupt, there'd be no control. Even his own throne would be in jeopardy. I mean, they don't actually think that because he's all powerful, but that's their argument.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you do? How do you answer these people? If your God is nonviolent, if he doesn't use those things, then what do you do about these people if he doesn't use that kind of action towards them? If his character is not like that, how do you answer them?
Yeah. Well, you hit it pretty good at the beginning there, that in the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die, is basically stating consequences. There are natural consequences to what you do. You act in that negative fashion and you get negative consequences. And, if people bring up that oh, God has to use violence to put down violence or force to put down force. Well, that's just, in a sense, perpetuating the problem. He's using the problem as a solution.
Yes.
In a sense. Judy?
But
Well, they will argue with you and they will tell you, well, no, the day that you don't die, they'll tell you, well, I sinned just 5 minutes ago and I'm not dead.
mhm.
So that's their reasoning. Well, if that's really true, then why don't I die now when I sin?
Well, of
Well,
course
you can't, it's hard to tell them that God is merciful and he wants them to give them time to understand, this government and the way reality operates, but they don't get it, They think they're getting away with this,
Yeah.
the things that they're doing.
the consequences are obviously long term. I mean, if it worked in the day you sin, you die, then none of us would be alive now. It wouldn't have gotten past the first generation. Did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say that in God's laws in Leviticus and places like that, there were consequences imposed by the people on rapists and murderers and all these bad people that you mentioned. So God did set up a system to deal with them. So I can sort of see what the people are saying,
Yeah.
what the people against the character of God. I can sort of get it.
Yeah, God did do that, and after
Maybe
the
that's
flood.
Accommodation, yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that. Before the flood came, God could see that the earth was full of violence, and they were killing themselves off basically. And after the flood, He instituted the decree, or whatever you want to say, if a man kills another, then he should die.
Mhm.
He was putting that within their civil society as an accommodation to protect against violence. He does not kill them off. He would rather forgive than have a murderer be executed even. But in order to keep society going, he had to make that accommodation, I guess. Dorothy?
Yeah, I think God is nonviolent, and He does warn us what would happen He does warn us of the consequences. And then if we don't obey His commands, then we kind of get into the man-made consequences, not God's, but man's. Like if you kill somebody, then you're charged with murder or something.
Yeah.
So it's man's consequences or laws or commands or whatever.
Yeah.
So I still believe that God will not use force, and He cannot use force.
Amen.
Okay, good. Gary?
Well, I think that's it. It's God saying, look, I have nothing to do with force, with coercion, and with violence, but you do. And in your thinking, you need that. But I know the truth about sin. The day that you eat it, you will die. Now, you don't understand that I'm giving mercy to everyone. And in the face of all this rebellion, I'm providing you life and grace instead of what you have earned, the wages that you have earned, but you don't understand that. So I'm protecting you against the spirit of violence and coercion that you insist on having, because those very principles you insist on having for protection is the very thing that's killing you and that will destroy you. You live by the sword, you will die by the sword. So God is not saying, okay, it's all right to restrict. It's all right to be forced. No. Why? Because those are the principles of Satan's government, and they are the root outgrowth of sin, and they are self-destructive. And if it were not for God's mercy, those principles would kill us instantly. We would die in the day. So God is saying, hey, this is you. This is what you want. But I'm telling you, I'm going to give you life because I'm God, and you could sin every breath that you take, and I can keep you alive instead. I can keep your sin from killing you and destroying you. And he basically does that every day with each one of us. He keeps us alive in spite of ourselves. But those very things that we insist on, restriction and violence and coercion, are Satan's government. And that's what kills us. And God says, you live by the sword. That's what he tells his people in the end, remember?
Yeah.
Revelation 13, when all the stuff is falling apart, you, I can't remember the first part of the verse, but he who lives by the sword will by that same sword die. And so I think you can, I guess we call it accommodation, you know. It says, okay, I'll do this, but I'm going to allow you to not be killed and allow you to do the very things that are against my government. And I'm going to keep you alive, even though those things are destructive and can kill you. It will be part of your system. I will allow that. And in spite of them, I will keep you alive because they are deadly. They are deadly. And so God never says it's okay to use that. He says, no, it's the opposite. Those are the principles of my enemy's kingdom. They will destroy you in the day that you do them. And so, but he does have a choice. I mean, what's he going to do? He can walk with us, keep us alive, and hope will turn, or turn his back and let the whole thing go to hell in a handbasket. And it would all be over with. Yeah.
He wants every opportunity. Paul, go ahead.
Something to me that really talks of God's character is just the fact that Satan and his angels are still alive.
Amen. Yes.
Why didn't God kill them? You know, if he was a forceful God, he didn't.
And if he did, if he had wiped out Lucifer, as he was named before, the moment he had a wrong thought against God in his mind, he could have quelled the rebellion, maybe, because then all the other angels would come one day and say, where's Lucifer? We haven't seen him for a while. And God might say, well, he's gone. And they would
My brothers.
yeah, they would ask some more questions, and they would soon start to distrust God. You know, what if I think the wrong thing? I'll be blotted out. It would not promote love in the universe, for sure. Gary, good comment?
Well, and if you think about it, Satan, next to the Son and the Spirit of God, was the closest, or first, they say, some, that he was the first created being, that he was the closest to God, other than the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But did he not know that God could read his thoughts when he was conniving and working against his? Well, of course he knew, which means is he knew about God's love and mercy, and he knew that God would be merciful toward him, and he used God's strength, the strength of God's character, actually against him to promote his own perverted ideas.
Yeah.
He well knew what God's character was like.
Yeah.
And he knew that he could get away with it, that God was good. And he would tramp on that goodness and that mercy to make himself look better and to exalt himself.
Yeah. Yeah, we know that Lucifer was the covering cherub. So that means he was right next to the throne of God. Okay, let's just do a bit more and then we'll take a break here. I asked the question, what is the difference between doing nothing and providing an accommodation? And in God's case, to do nothing, I think, would amount to indifference. He can't do that. When we walk away from him, when we sin in any way, he's not indifferent to it. He's going to do, you know, the word accommodation is a very general term, okay? In some cases, it just means allowing us to go our own way. And you could call that doing nothing, but his allowing it, and as Michael brought out well, he weeps when that happens. You know, he does everything he can to turn us around. He's not indifferent to our suffering at all. We've seen many examples of accommodation, and I guess I don't have it here. You know, he allowed polygamy, he allowed slavery, he allowed them to have a king. There's many of those sorts of things that were accommodations, things he allowed them to have that were not really for their best good, but they were so insistent that he did not force them to go the same way. Let's just do this quickly so we get to read a couple of verses and then we'll have our break. I mentioned one example, we want a king, the people said. Part of the deal of inheriting the promised land was that God would be their God. Okay, that was involved in the initial promise. And let's just read Genesis 17:8. Axel, please.
And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay,
so included in that transaction, if you want to call it that, was that he would be their God or their ruler. We could even use the word king, I suppose. Later on, they rejected God's rule, and this is what he said in reaction to that. 1 Samuel 8:7, Carlos.
And the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them.
Okay, so even though they had rejected him, I mean, he said they did, he did not abandon them. He was not indifferent to them. In fact, he, in that case, made an accommodation and he said, okay, you can have a king. And he even gave them the sort of king they would want. And he also told them what would happen if they had a king, the things he would do that would be negative. But they insisted, even though he reasoned with them, and he said, well, okay, here's your king. Okay, I don't know how many of you watched the recordings, but it's good to have them available. Obviously, Axel was interested in it. So, okay, so the 10 Commandments. Okay, go ahead, Michael, please. Exodus 34:28.
And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither did eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments.
Okay, it's the word, is words, not commandments, that is translated from the word debar. Okay. He wrote upon the tables the words of the 10 Commandments. Actually, 10 Commandments is the same word. Okay, if you can see on my Bible software screen, words is 1697 and commandments is 1697.
Okay.
So it's like he wrote upon the tables the commandments of the 10 Commandments, or he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 words. Okay, words and commandments are both from debar, same word. Here's the definition of it. I won't go through all that except to point out that it is used, the word debar, 1,439 times. Okay, very, very frequent in the Old Testament. 807 of those times it is translated as word. Okay, and it's translated as commandment only 20 times. So it just shows that, I mean, obviously a commandment is a word or a saying, but a word is not necessarily a commandment. So the more general meaning of debar is something that is spoken. Okay, we could say. Well, I've got it here.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, here's my hand.
Yeah.
The times that they, the 807 odd times that they translated a word, is that a singular thing, like only one word, or are we talking about phrases? Because the commandments are phrases. They're not, it's not one word though, is it? It's more than one word.
Yeah. What it's saying here is that the word debar is translated into word 807 times, to thing 231 times, to commandment 20 times. Now that does not include plurals. So where it says word, sometimes it'll be words, sometimes it'll be words. Commandment could be commandment or commandments, okay? But it's referring to the number of instances of a translation. So it'd be translated as matter or matters maybe 63 times. Okay,
I
so
think his point is that the commandments are big, long sentences, right? Thou shalt not
yeah,
kill.
it's translating the word.
Yeah,
not-
word. But the
yeah.
word of the Lord is the whole Bible. So
Yes.
word can mean a lot of things.
So 56 times translated as word commandment, only 1.4% of the time, as opposed to 56%. And here you can see all, and this is interesting too. The word debar is translated, or this 1697, into over 50 different words, and there's the list of them. Which is an interesting thing to know about the Hebrew. It's a very I don't say imprecise language. Maybe that's not a good word, but
Adaptive.
adaptive.
Adapts to the,
Depends very much on the context. It's not as concrete as our language. Here is the first use of the word debar. Genesis 11:1. Gary, if you could read that, please.
All right. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech.
Okay, we wouldn't put the word commandment in there, would we? But obviously speech works, one language. Genesis 15:1, Judy.
after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward.
Okay, so debar is translated in that verse as word. Okay, does that sound like a command?
No,
What does it sound more like?
it's just the word of the Lord. It's what he said to him.
Okay, but what he actually said is more like a promise, isn't it?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a command, it's more like a promise. Okay, Isaiah 30 and verse 21, Michael, or maybe Dorothy's not back yet. Go ahead, Michael.
And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. 30:21.
Yep. Okay, so word there is at 1697.
Yeah, and there's a good example of the word being a whole bunch of words.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's not just a word, but it's a saying or whatever. Genesis 18:19, Nora.
Okay. For I know him that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him.
Okay. He, Abraham, will command his children after him. Let's read, this will help us understand that verse, I think. Proverbs 22:6, Paul.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Okay. Can you see that the train up a child is kind of equivalent to command his children, if you compare those two verses? So I think the commanding is not so much that the parent is running around issuing commands all the time to his children as he is training or guiding them. Okay, and just a note that command in this verse, Genesis 18:19, is actually a different word, a different Hebrew word than what we've looked at before. Okay, so it has all these meanings. You can look at that. Webster's 1828 dictionary I thought was interesting. Among the different definitions it gives is this one: to direct or to send. Okay, that's not the same as a commandment. I wouldn't say you must do this. It's more giving direction. I have found a fellow named Jeff Benner to be very good on Hebrew, understanding Hebrew words and things. And he gives a definition: to cause, to turn, move, or point undeviatingly, or to follow a straight course, give instructions or orders for a path to be taken. Okay, so that could be a definition of command, is to give instructions or directions. And it sounds kind of like that in these verses. Psalm 25:9.
The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way.
Okay, and then Proverbs 3:5-6, Carlos.
Trust the Lord with all heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths.
Okay, good. And Dorothy, Psalm 32:8, please.
I will instruct thee and lead thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. It's very comforting.
Yeah, those three passages there kind of sound more like giving instructions or direction than they do commands, don't they? Okay, it just helps to bring out the meaning there.
Are they all the same word? Teach his way and direct your paths?
No,
Okay.
I didn't look up the words there. It's just to give the idea that God's, what he says to us, because the original words can just mean a saying or a word. They're often to give direction. Okay, let's read Exodus 7:2, Gary.
Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land.
Okay. Basically, what's that is saying is just, Moses, you shall speak or repeat all that I tell you. Okay. Okay, let's look at this, the commandment to love. Okay, that's kind of an interesting concept. So let's look at the idea of a command to love. Mark 12:29-30, Judy.
Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment.
Okay, so is that commandment saying, love me or else? That would be kind of a hard saying. So I put some statements here, and I just want to see what response we can come up with. Love, the emotion, cannot be commanded. Love as an action, a behavior, can be commanded. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the emotion can't be, but you can do loving things even when you don't feel like it.
Okay. Loving things. Okay. Share with your brother, Johnny. Okay, good. So love as an action, so meaning to do an act that is loving, can be commanded, and I can will to obey. Okay, someone could tell me to do something loving to someone, and I could use my will to obey that command. You agree?
No.
Okay. Love as an emotional response is not something we can even will in ourselves. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, not something we can will. We can love someone, but we can't instantly love someone just by deciding to. It's a response in our emotions that comes from stimulus, from getting to know that person, etc. So can a brand new Christian truly say, I love God? Or they might say, I love God with all my heart. Or they've just been convinced that God is real.
If he knows God's character.
Okay, I agree. A brand new Christian probably wouldn't know God's character, though.
Okay. A brand new mother can love her newborn baby without knowing that baby
Right.
very well.
Right.
It just, you just automatically love them.
Yeah.
So, and I think a brand new Christian, they wouldn't have become a Christian if they didn't love God in some way, even if it's limited.
Yeah.
In their knowledge of God, they love what they know.
Okay. I think
So-
the mother loving the child is, what's the word for it? A conditioned thing that God has put into humanity. Gary?
Of course, we know that love itself is not just a bare raw act, because Jesus said, okay, you may not commit the bare raw act of adultery, but if you're desiring it, if you're feeling it, if you're feeling murder, you are what? Guilty of murder. And so I believe God's plan to restore us is not, well, I'm going to do this just because I know it's right and it's God's commandment and he told me to do it. No, true restoration goes so far as that's my enemy. I actually love, I feel, it makes me feel really, really good to embrace and love him, and not just to treat him good, but I actually want to. I desire it in my inmost person to feel very, very affectionate about the one who might be trying to kill me. That's restoration. The other, I believe, is just a form of godliness where you have the act is not really going along with how we're really feeling or thinking. In that sense, on the inside, an emotional deal. So I may not commit murder, but if I hate somebody, what? Am I guilty?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. So it includes both those, restoration in both areas. And so I hate it. God says, you should do this, but I don't feel like it. I immediately say, Lord, I really don't have the feeling. I'll do this because you said it. I know it's right. That's what love does. But Lord, give me the joy, a really, really good feeling about wanting and desiring to do this. And then you know what? I found out that he does.
Yeah.
All we do is ask for it.
Yeah. There's expressions like expression deepens impression or something. Like if you do something loving towards someone, it'll encourage the emotion in your heart. There's also things like fake it till you make it, act loving even if you don't feel like it. You can, I make the distinction this way, that I can love another person even if I don't like things about them. So the loving them is wishing the best for them, and not doing them any harm or even help them. But it could be there's things I don't like about them. That's entirely possible, I think. So here's a statement: while I cannot will myself to love you, I can will to act benevolently or lovingly toward you. So this is from a website here. One way around the difficulty is by reinterpreting what is meant by love. While I cannot will myself to love you, I can will to act benevolently toward you. And while it makes no sense to command love, it does make sense to command benevolent behavior. You ought to love her makes no sense, but you ought to act as if you love her does make sense. Okay. There cannot be a duty to love, but there might be a duty to do the sorts of things to and for a person that one would do without a sense of duty if one were to love.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can't command love, okay, but you can command or act in a loving manner. We are told to keep the most important commandment, to hear and pay attention to God's word. Let's read Mark 12:29, Judy.
No, Michael.
For the first of all commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord.
So if we will do that, hear and trust enough to actually follow his directions to hear, which means to listen, the result will be this in verse 30. So to hear in the Hebrew doesn't mean just physically sound going into your ears. It means to pay attention to and do something about it. Okay, so the result will be as expressed in verse 30, Mark 12:30, Nora.
And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment, to love the Lord.
Okay, so that's interesting. At the end of that verse, Mark repeats, this is the first commandment, referring back to the command to hear in verse 29. Okay, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. The thou shalt love is in what's called the future indicative rather than the imperative. Now, this gets into grammatical things, which I'm not very good at, but I've had to look into some of it to understand these words. So the verses are stating both the cause, hear and follow God, and the result, you will come to love him. So I've kind of charted it here. The command is hear, and that's the imperative, which means you should do that. Okay. And the result is thou shalt love. That's indicated. That's not imperative. It's not saying you must love. It's stating that as a result of the hearing. Okay. If you'll hear and listen to God, you will love him as a result. You see the difference there between imperative and indicative?
Yes.
So a look at the meaning of the Hebrew word for love in ancient Hebrew culture kind of helps. And again, Jeff Benner is good on this. He gives a translation for the word ahab, is the Hebrew word in that case, to provide and protect that which is given as a privilege, an intimacy of action and emotion, strong affection for another arising from personal ties, or we could say experience, familiarity with them. And he goes on to explain this. We do not choose our parents or siblings, but are instead given to us. They are given to us as a gift from above, a privileged gift. Even in the ancient Hebrew culture, one's wife was chosen, that is chosen by the parents for the young person. It is our responsibility to provide and protect that privileged gift. In our modern Western culture, love is an abstract thought of emotion, how one feels toward another, but the Hebrew meaning goes much deeper. As a verb, this word means to provide and protect what is given as a privilege, as well as to have an intimacy of action and emotion. We are told to love Elohim and our neighbors, not in an emotional sense, but in the sense of our actions. Okay, so it's like the command, the imperative is to act in a loving manner, and the result will be the emotion. Okay, you can't command emotions, in other words. You can command actions, and if you will follow those actions, the desired emotion will come from that. Okay, let's just go on. The consequences. Deuteronomy 30, verse 16. Paul, please.
In that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess.
Okay. Can you see that the command, if that command to love is love me or else, that would be inconsistent with a God of love who honors free will, wouldn't it? Okay, so this idea of commanding something and free will are definitely maybe good terms to tie together here, because one is very much related to the other. So let's look at a couple of sort of miscellaneous things here. Exodus 20 and verse 2, this is just before, I think it's verse 3 where they start giving the 10 commandments, but the verse before, Axel.
I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
Okay, so it's basically reminding them of what he has done for them. Okay, and of course they're quite familiar with that because they walked all that way and they were rescued from the Egyptians and provided the manna and the water and all those things. So they knew all the good things he had done for them. And then it goes on, starting in verse 3, to give the 10 commandments. And while they can be seen as restrictive commands, and many people see them that way, when we come to understand all that God has done for us and have a better idea of his character, then we can begin to view them as promises. You know, you won't do those things. I'm glad of a promise that I will never kill anyone. I mean, can you imagine how you would feel if that happened? And you, never mind, you might spend years in prison. But it's reassuring to know that you don't need to, and God will help you to not do those negative things. Okay, so here's an interesting collection of verses. We won't read them all, but showing the purpose, we could say, of God's commandments. So the first one is Deuteronomy 5:29. Carlos, do you have that?
Oh, it's okay. Oh, that there were such an art in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever.
Okay, so keep my commandments. Why? So that God can gloat that everyone's obeying him and he's so great? No, it's that it may be well with them. It's for our good, not his. Okay. Next one is Deuteronomy 5:33. Dorothy.
Ye shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God hath commanded you, that ye may live, and that it might be well with you, and that ye may prolong your stays in the land which you shall possess.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there it is again, that it may be well with you. And remember, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, earlier before this verse 29 that we read, the 10 commandments are given again. Okay, they're given twice. And Deuteronomy actually means the second law. Okay, nomos is the law. So deutero, second law, second or repeating of the law. Okay, and then Deuteronomy 6:2, Gary.
That thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee now, and thy son and thy son's son all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged.
Okay, that thy days may be prolonged. It's kind of like that it may be well with you. And then the next verse, verse 3, it says again, that it may be well with you. Later in the same chapter, verse 18, that it may be well with thee. Verse 24 of the same chapter, for our good always. Okay, so quite a few times it's repeated. The purpose of the commandments is for their good, not for God's good. He just wants to bless and provide. Yeah, so they're for us, not for him. Have you ever heard someone say this? They are the 10 commandments, not the 10 suggestions. You heard someone say that? And when they say that, it's usually said in a certain way or even a certain tone of voice or implying something. What's kind of the implication that goes along with that?
That we have to obey
Or
else.
Yeah.
They're commandments. They're not just suggestions. You're supposed to do them.
Yeah, and you better do them because our God is an awesome God with lightning in his fists or whatever. 10 commandments, not 10 suggestions. Along with that, I had someone say to me once, there's nothing wrong with legalism. That's kind of parallel to this in a way. And okay, there's nothing wrong with legalism. What is legalism? What would be a brief definition of that? Anyone? What's an ism?
Ism?
A belief system, isn't it?
An ism is a belief system, exactly. So what is legalism?
I think it's believing you can
System
save
in the-
yourself by your works.
Okay. It's the belief that we can be saved by keeping the law.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. And have you ever seen this? Our favorite diagram?
Only a few times.
Only a few times. So the belief that we can be saved by keeping the law would be equivalent to doing what in that diagram, or concentrating on what part of that diagram?
Mopping up the sinful acts of the water.
Yeah, mopping up the mess on the floor. Okay, if I can stop outwardly disobeying the law, then I'm good. I can be saved. That's kind of the idea. What does legalism, what does legalism imply in terms of God's acceptance of us? So someone that believed in legalism would believe a certain way about God's, whether he accepts us or not. And what would that be?
He won't accept us if we don't keep the law.
Okay, or he will accept us if we
When
do
we
keep the
keep the law.
law. Yeah. Okay.
I think,
So what was that again?
Well, okay, I'll
Judy,
state it. Go ahead and say it again.
forget what I said.
Okay, the question is, what does legalism imply in terms of God's acceptance of us? He will accept us if,
yeah,
I think I said he won't accept us if we don't keep the law. And you said he will only accept us when we do keep the
yeah,
law.
I just turned it around.
Turn
yeah.
it around, yeah.
So
So, yeah.
basically it's saying that God's acceptance of us is based on our performance rather than our relationship or his
Yeah.
love for us. Okay. Up to this, there are 10 commandments, not 10 suggestions. Okay. The way commandments are normally understood, like obey me or else, I would say that the 10 commandments are actually closer to 10 suggestions than they are to 10 commandments. Okay. If you will do these things, it will go well with you. I will accept you either way, but I'm suggesting you do these things and you will be blessed. I'm not going to command you to do them in terms of if you don't, I will arbitrarily impose a punishment on you. Okay, let's shift gears and look a bit about free will. We've talked about it. Do you believe in free will? That God grants us free will?
Mhm.
Okay, why do we believe that?
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him will have eternal life. It's a choice.
Okay, the whosoever, that's a good word. That implies yes or no.
It applies a choice on our part.
Right. Okay. What is it in the context of God's character that says we must have free will? Isn't it the God's love part?
Yes, love.
Yeah, because love and free will have to go together. You can't force love. Okay. So some believe that as far as our eternal destiny is concerned, we do not have free will. And there's a debate in Christianity that goes back centuries to two theological views, generally described as Calvinism after John Calvin and Arminianism after Jacobus Arminius. And the Calvinist view is that God alone decides who is saved and who is lost. And Arminianism is the belief in free will, that our salvation is dependent on our individual choice.
So
Okay.
is Calvinism predestination then?
Calvinism would include predestination, yes. So here's a little sort of summary of the two positions, and we'll touch briefly on these different terms here. So in Calvinism, they use an acronym TULIP. Okay, TULIP, TULIP, to remember these principles of Calvinism. And by contrast, Arminianism uses FACTS, FACTS, as their sort of 5 points of their beliefs. So in Calvinism, it starts with total depravity. And I've got a bunch of information here. We won't go through it all, but this comes from Tim Jennings' website. He has quite a good summary of this. For total depravity, he describes it, and it's the same for either one. They're just put in different places. I don't know why we're getting that feedback. So total depravity means all humans are born corrupt, at enmity with God, possessing a carnal nature that naturally wars against God, and that we can do nothing to change it, and that we have no responsibility to respond to God and accept his offer of salvation.
No ability to respond.
Okay, and we know there are scriptures, and I didn't look them up, but there's none good, no, not one. All our righteousnesses are as filthy rags, and there's different verses like that that just tell us of our condition to start with. Okay, and then Calvinism has what's called unconditional election, meaning that God elects to save some and not others, independent of our condition. Okay, what we do has no effect on it. It's just totally up to him who is saved and who is lost. Okay, and then they have what they call limited atonement, which means that the atonement was made only for those people who God has elected to be saved. Okay, there is no atonement if God has not chosen you to be saved. And for those that he has chosen to be saved, there is irresistible grace. In other words, he gives those persons that he has chosen to be saved grace enough to save them, and they can do nothing about it. They can't resist it. They can't reject it. They have to be saved whether they want to or not. And then there's what they call the preservation of the saints, meaning that when he has elected them, chosen them to be saved, that state will carry right through to heaven, basically. He will preserve them in that condition, and they can't do anything about it. Okay, sounds good if you're a chosen one, right? But if you're not, you can't do anything about it.
You're hooped.
You're hooped. What does that do for someone's love of God? You know, hanging over everyone, there's that uncertainty that I could be lost, even if in my heart I feel I love God. Because in spite of that, if he hasn't chosen me, I'm not going to make it.
Yeah,
That's
your love would diminish.
Your love would diminish or disappear. Whereas Arminianism, which is the way I would go, is that we are freed by grace, and we have free will, freedom to choose to believe or not. Okay, that's our choice. He gives us many incentives to believe, but we finally have to do that. And the atonement is available for all. Okay, Judy quoted John 3:16 there. Any who choose to believe can be atoned to God. And the atonement, I would say, goes deeper than that, and that atonement coming from at one meant, a condition of being at one with God, is very much dependent, or largely dependent, on our getting to know him and what he is like, and appreciating that character so that we want to be at one with him. And then Arminianism has conditional election, which is conditional on whether or not we elect or choose God's way. I guess we could say it. Total depravity is basically the same as what I described before, because we all start off in that condition. But in spite of that, when we have made that election, that choice, we can be secure in Christ if we maintain that relationship with him. Okay. Kind of a quick rundown. Sorry I talk so much, but a quick introduction to these two different systems that kind of point out the difference between free will and God choosing who would be saved or lost. Is everyone happy with Arminianism? Do you want to go that way?
Yeah.
I think so.
Not Calvinism.
Not Calvinism. And there's a lot of people that believe in Calvinism. And I remember one time years ago when I was working at the biological station, there was a fellow there that I used to have spiritual conversations with, and he was very much a Calvinist. And I guess we were outside one day and we heard someone swearing really badly or doing something terrible. I forget what it was. But the comment made by this Calvinist was, it doesn't matter. You're either chosen for salvation or you aren't. What you do doesn't matter. And I kind of thought, whoa, that's not the way I believe it. Okay, here I say, imposed law is the law of dictators. Design law is the law of our Creator. And how you understand God's law makes a big difference as to whether you will choose which one of these two, Calvinism or Arminianism. And it's really a basis of a lot of our correct understanding of God's character. And I'd just like to point out this image I have here. The title is The Final Message of Mercy to the World. And it's quite a new publication by Timothy Jennings, where he kind of relates the three angels' messages to, which is an end time message, of course, in Revelation 14. He relates it to the final message of mercy to the world, which he believes, and I believe, to be a revelation of God's character of love to the world through God's people. Okay. Yeshua came already once to reveal what his Father is like, and that's all recorded in his word for our benefit, and we are to use that and reflect that love in our lives. Okay. Just a bit more. Here's some verses that imply that we have free will and the freedom of choice, because we do want to establish that from Scripture. So, Judy, can you read Joshua 24:15, please?
And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Okay, of course, that's Joshua talking, but I believe he's reflecting a message from God saying, choose this day. God's saying, choose me or go serve the other gods. It's up to you. He's not going to force it. Okay, and then 1 Kings 18:21, Michael.
And Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him, not a word. That's interesting. They didn't say anything, isn't it?
Yeah, the same message is there. If the Lord be God, follow him. Answered not a word. I guess they were unsure what's going to happen. Of course, what did happen just after that?
Well, there was the test between the two altars of sacrifice.
Right.
Baal's followers, nobody answered, but God answered by fire.
And after he answered by fire, then what did the people say?
The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God.
Yes. Okay. They were responding more to a demonstration of power than to a revelation of love. And
Yeah, that's true.
That's why it didn't stick, I think. Yeah, it's too bad, but like I say, God tried anyway. Okay, Ezekiel 20, verse 39. Nora.
As for you, O home of Israel, thus saith the Lord God, go ye, serve ye every one his idols, and hereafter also, if ye will not hearken unto me, but pollute ye my holy name no more with your gifts and with your idols.
Okay, so there's that important little word if in there. If you will not hearken to me, if you will not hear my voice, as we read in that verse earlier, then you've made your choice, go your way. I was certainly not happy about it, but we have a verse in the New Testament, Yeshua talking to his disciples, that kind of also implies free will there. John 6:67, Paul.
Then Yeshua said to the 12, do you also want to go away?
Okay. He wasn't telling them to go away. He wasn't telling them they had to stay, but he was just, in a sense, giving them the offer of following their own will. You know, which way will you go? You know, he certainly did not believe in coercive force or thou must love God or else. Okay, James 1:25 is interesting. He talks about the law of liberty. Axel, do you have that?
Yeah. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed.
Okay, thank you. Your volume is a little bit on the low side there, Axel, but we can hear you. Law of liberty, that's an interesting term. If it's a law of liberty, then it can't be a law of what, constraint and that sort of thing. So it also cannot be coerced or mandated. Law of liberty. In what sense? How does that work? Law of liberty. Or to ask it another way, what does that imply about the connection between commandments and free will?
I think it means that you're free of sin. And when you're free of sin, you're free of death. And so it's giving you that liberty from those things.
Okay, good. That's what I kind of said, freedom from the deadly effects of sin. Okay. If we follow God's law, we can be free from lots of things. We have to follow it to be free, but we always have that choice. And it's always the better choice. Follow God's way, his commands, suggestions, if you want to use that word. Recommendations, directions, because he always wants what is best for us. And as a God of infinite knowledge and love, we can have confidence that his ways are the best ways. So follow his commandments.
Yeah. We also always have free will, whether or not we're going to follow them.
Yes.
But if we follow them, we'll be a whole lot happier.
Yeah. Okay, any last thoughts or anything? There's a lot more that could be said about commandments. I just sort of looked at a few areas, but I wanted to relate it to free will, because that kind of made sense to put the two together. So.